Shalom, shalom, and welcome to Seeking Truth in Torah Ministry. I'm Yosef Ben Avram, and this is the Restoration of All Things, Part 4. I was intending to only do 3 parts of the Restoration of All Things, but then I remembered that there is so much more that Abba Father has given that I believe He wants me to share with you. And one of those parts is this part called Proclaiming the Gospel of Yeshua. And the aim of this part 4 is to take everything that we have learned in part 1, part 2, and part 3 and put it into a capsule so that you can understand the entire message of restoration that Yeshua came proclaiming from the very beginning, that the Father has been doing, and how Yeshua came to fulfill everything that the Father intended from the very beginning. So I pray that this will help you. I pray that it will also open up all those parts that we did in a greater detail for you, so that you can have a better understanding, and so that you can become the man or the woman that Yeshua wants you to be. So before we start, let's just pray. Father, I want to pray in the name of Yeshua Mashiach. Father, I want to pray that you will give me the ability today, Father, to teach as you want me to teach. Father, to share as you want me to share. Father, to bring about your word, Abba Father, in a way, Father, that is understandable, but also in a way, Father, that brings life and brings change to our spirits. And I thank you for that, Yahweh. Father, I submit myself to you today, and I pray, Abba Father, that you will take control, and Father, that you will lead, that you will guide, and that you will orchestrate, Father, everything that needs to be said in Yeshua's name. Father, we give you all the praise, we give you all the glory, and we thank you in Yeshua's name. Amen. Now, most of us that have attended church, we have heard many times people say, oh, but you know what, the gospel is simple. But the question that I would like to ask you is that really true? Is the gospel simply the message of the good news, or is it that Yeshua came to do something more? We have been taught that it's basically that Yeshua came to earth to pay the price for our sins. But the question I'd like to ask you is there not more? Now that you have heard the restoration of all things, part 1, part 2, and part 3, I'm sure that now you've come to realize that there is so much more that He came to do. There is so much more, not only that He came to do, but so much more with regards to what the gospel really is. And I've come to see that the message is sometimes easy within the scriptures, but at other times it's really hard to understand. And without the Ruach, we will be a people that always read and never really understand. And we live in an ever-changing world, brothers and sisters, and we're seeing it more and more. When you just go look at the news and you see how the world is busy changing, how things have been turned upside down. We are beginning to truly live in the time of Matthew chapter 24. And we're seeing those events that are beginning to unfold. There's wars, there's rumors of wars, there's earthquakes, there's so many things that are taking place, and they're all taking place at such a rapid rate. And Yeshua said in Matthew 24 that we are not to be alarmed by these things, for they need to happen, but the end will not yet come. But what's interesting is He goes on to say that we will be hated and persecuted for what we believe, and that brother, in other words, believer against believer, and they will hand one another over. Then He goes on to say, but even when that happens, the end will not come until what? Until the gospel of the reign of His kingdom is preached as a testimony to all nations. Now, like I said, for years the church has been teaching the message of the gospel. But the problem is, have they been teaching the message of Yeshua, and have they been teaching the same message that He came proclaiming when He was upon this earth? The question also is, are they even preaching what the apostles taught? Are they really teaching the gospel as the apostles taught it? And the problem is that just like everything else that the church has done, they have played pick and pay with what Yahweh intends for us to understand. They have gone and selected what they feel you should know. And that's an abomination. It's not right. It's not the right thing for us to do. And they have thrown out what they felt is not good enough, or what they felt they couldn't understand, or what they felt just didn't make sense. They kind of just got rid of it and said, well, this is how we interpret it. It doesn't really mean anything for you today. It's just all that Old Testament stuff. Let's just get away with it. But the problem is that many face a predicament today in their understanding of what the gospel is and where it actually originates. Many will tell you that it comes from the New Testament. And I'm sure, just like myself, that when you got saved or when you became a Christian, many times people would turn, instead of going to the book of Genesis to begin their walk of faith, they told you, hey, you know what? Start in the book of John, John chapter 1. Start there. Why not Matthew? Why not Genesis? Why John? I just never understood that, actually. But the truth is that we need to start right in the beginning, in the Torah, so that we can have a full understanding of what the message really is. And like I said, the aim of this teaching will be to show you the truth of the gospel message and how far you and I as believers have been removed from that original message. And we need to understand the truth of the word of Yahweh and the duty of those who call themselves the remnant or the elect. There is a duty, brothers and sisters, of those of us who believe that Abba Father has called us for such a time as this. And both Matthew as well as Revelation reveal to us that there is going to be a time when the true message of the gospel will be proclaimed. And I believe that that time is right now. And I strongly believe that the message has already begun to be proclaimed by those, as I have said throughout the teachings, who have ears to hear and eyes to see. And we need to live, brethren. We need to be living like the true remnant of Yahweh. And we need to be people who are not afraid of speaking His truth to all people that we meet in this life. Now, let's take a look at something very specific. The word gospel itself is easily defined, but what about the concept? What about the concept behind the word? And let's take a look at what it actually means. Now, gospel, or its synonyms, are used 132 times in the apostolic scriptures, in other words, in the New Testament. The word gospel is the Strong's G2097 and G2098. And it literally means good news, or as many people say, the good news or the glad tidings. And these two Greek words, euangelion and eugelizio, are translated into English in the authorized version via the following words. As a noun, it is referred to as gospel, and as a verb, it is referred to preach or bring good tidings, show glad tidings, declare glad tidings. So the word itself is quickly defined, but what really then is the good news? Now, I want you to take note that without a proper understanding of what the gospel is, much of the Bible, as I have shown you in part 1, part 2, and part 3, much of the Bible, as well as much of the parables of Yeshua, will be totally misunderstood by a normal person, or by not uneducated, I wouldn't say that, but a person who doesn't fully understand what Yeshua is coming to do. So then we translate or not translate, but we put our own understanding into the scriptures, and we bring out of it what we think it should mean, instead of looking at it as He came proclaiming it. And that is why it's so important that we understand the restoration of all things and who we are, so that we can actually understand to who He's talking first and foremost. Alright? So like I said, without a proper understanding of what the gospel is, much of the Bible and the parables of Yeshua will be misunderstood, as many of you have come to realize as you have grown up in your faith. Now, not only this, but our task as the children of Elohim in the last days will be greatly misunderstood. We won't understand who we are in Messiah Yeshua and what role we play in the fulfillment of His return, as I spoke to you, I think, in part 2 about Acts chapter 3, verse 19 to 21, where it says about the restoration of all things, and that Abba Father is retaining Yeshua until that time, and then He will send Him forward. So we won't understand these things if we don't understand the true message. Alright? But the question I want to ask you again then is, what is the good news? One cannot read apostolic scriptures without seeing that Yeshua is the center of this good news message. He is the Shamash. He is the one in the center that is like the burning fire. He is the centerpiece of this entire message. And praise be to Yahweh that this has been the center of the Christian message for over 2,000 years. They have taught the death, the burial, and resurrection of Messiah, and the redemption of mankind through the shedding of Messiah's blood. And again, the question comes up. It comes up in our minds that if this is truly the full message of the gospel, then what's the whole deal? Because there must be something more. And is there something that has been missed for over 2,000 years that is now only beginning to be proclaimed from the lips of Yahweh's servants? And the answer to that is yes, most definitely. There is something that has been missed, and now is the time that our Father is revealing it to His children. Now, let's take a look at Paul. His real name being Shaul, the missionary to the Gentiles. He was a man who understood the message of the gospel far better than many of us do today. And you know what? He proclaimed this in the book of Romans, and I'm reading from Romans chapter 10 and from verse 14. Now, pardon me for my nose. I've been sick for a few days, so I just pray that you'll bear with me. It's just kind of like all blocked up, but I'm here and I'm with you. So let's go on. All right. So it says in Romans chapter 10, verse 14, how then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without one proclaiming? So here, Paul is talking about the need for somebody to be proclaiming the gospel, otherwise people will not understand and they will also not know about him. Then he goes on and he says in verse 15, and how shall they proclaim if they were not sent? Talking about the need for people to be sent to proclaim the gospel. As it has been written, how pleasant are the feet of those who bring the good news of peace, who bring the good news of the good. Now, brethren, let's take a look at what is actually going on. Paul is really showing us a deeper and very lost understanding of the message of the gospel just by reading these few verses. That is what he is doing. And the problem today with many of the Christian scholars is the method of interpretation. Greek scholarship and within seminaries use a biblical type of interpretation called hermeneutics. But in the days of Paul, there was no such thing as hermeneutics. Paul relied on the Jewish model. He relied on the Hebraic model, which was midrash. So Paul, who is a first century rabbi, he used this method of midrash. And here Paul is actually referring the reader to the book of Isaiah chapter 52, and actually chapter 52 verse 7 in particular. But we're going to look at quite a few chapters. And now what I would like you to notice is this is exactly what Yeshua does too. Remember I shared with you the story where he walked into the synagogue and he proclaimed from the scroll of Isaiah. So what he was actually doing was he was midrashing on that entire chapter. He was drawing out of that chapter something that many of the rabbis sitting there would have understood. So what Paul is doing is he's referring to the Torah, he's referring to a part of the Torah, and what he's actually doing, actually to the part of the Tanakh, and what he's doing is he's actually drawing from it, and he is now preaching from it. It's called midrashing. He's midrashing from the Tanakh. He's drawing out of the scriptures, and he is now proclaiming it to you. All right, let's take a look. Let's turn, and I think by now you should know that you should have your Bible with you when we do these teachings, all right? So it's important to remember that any part of a verse represents the whole chapter. And all Torah scholars at the time would understand that Paul was referring to the entire chapter, much the same, as I said, as Yeshua in the book of Luke chapter 4 verse 18, where in essence he is actually quoting the entire chapter of Isaiah chapter 61. So that's the idea of midrash. Any part of a verse represents the whole chapter. So that's why we need to understand the scriptures in this way. So many times Paul will be quoting throughout the New Testament parts of the Old Testament, but in essence he's actually referring to the entire chapter, and it's for you to go and study the entire chapter. All right, so therefore let's take a look at the entire chapter in its context, and then do our best to see if we can comment on each verse. So get your Bible, bring it out, open it up. We're going to start in Isaiah chapter 52, reading from verse 1 to verse 13. All right. So I'm only going to highlight the verses that are very important. And if you have your Bible with you, or if you have a notebook, then make notes on it. All right. Now it says in Isaiah chapter 52 verse 2, it says, O captive daughter Zion. Now, brethren, when we see this, we are immediately drawn back to what we were speaking about in part 1, part 2, and part 3, where Yahweh said that he would scatter his people to the nations. All right? So this verse identifies the subject of the prophecy as who? As the people of Israel. All right? Verse 3 goes on and says, you have sold yourselves. To who did they sell themselves? They sold themselves, as I said to you before, to their harlot lovers. Then it goes on and says, you have sold yourself for nothing, and you shall be redeemed without money. Can you see the connection here between the story of Isaiah and what has happened to Israel over the years? All right. So Israel has become, as we said in part 1 and part 2 and part 3, Israel has become apostate spiritually. And this history has repeated itself many times in Israel's long and sad history. And it's important to comment here on this for a second. Alright? In Acts chapter 15 from verse 20, I've spoken to you about this before. It was the first Jerusalem council where James gave the 4 rules, and it was for this very history of Israel's harlotry with the nations. They had been playing the harlot with the nations, and it's important to note that this is not just, as I said, sexual immorality that James is speaking about, it's cult harlotry. And therefore many in the church, they misinterpret the 4 rules. Sadly so do many brothers and sisters in the Messianic movement. They interpret it to mean the Noahidic laws. No, it is talking about cult harlotry. It's talking about going after a demonic cult ritual that they were doing. Alright? And that's exactly what Yahweh was saying, as I explained to you in the previous teachings, that they had become one flesh with the idol. And Yahweh was saying, you have gone after foreign gods, as we saw in the story with the Samaritan woman. She had 5 husbands, speaking in the spiritual sense of the fact that she was bound in the flesh to other gods. Alright? Are you with me? Let's go on. Now it says in 52 verse 5, my people is taken away for nothing. Brethren, Israel went into captivity because of her spiritual apostasy. Verse 7. Now we can see in verse 7 how Paul is talking about that specific verse where in Romans, right? In Romans chapter 10, he refers to this verse. He says, how beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who brings good tidings, that publishes peace, that brings good tidings of good, that publishes salvation, that say unto Zion, your Elohim reigns. So here we see Isaiah prophesies that the time of Israel's spiritual restoration and redemption and deliverance is what? It's coming, right? So Paul is talking about this, but we need to go and look at the entire chapter. That's what a good student understands. All right, let's go on. So in verse 8, it says, when Yahweh shall bring again Zion. So Yahweh promises to redeem Israel from captivity where they were because they left the Torah ways of Yahweh. And they sold themselves, as I said to you, into an adulterous relationship with their foreign lovers. Verse 9. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The question is, how will Yahweh redeem Israel out of sinfulness and bring them back to himself spiritually? Brethren, this is the crux of the entire gospel message. How will Yahweh redeem Israel out of sinfulness and bring them back to himself spiritually? He cannot break his Torah. So if the Torah says that if someone is spiritually adulterous, that you can divorce them, but then it also says that you cannot what? Marry a divorced person. Not so? So how does Yahweh reconcile? How does he reconcile this entire problem? That's what we're going to look at, and that's what we're going in a direction towards. So in chapter 52 verse 13, this is where it enters with Yeshua the Messiah. He comes in and he is the suffering servant, and he is the one, brethren, that will redeem the people of Israel. Now in chapter 53, and I'm reading verse 4 and 6, if you go and read it, I'm just commenting on it, alright? Isaiah prophesied that the Redeemer of Yahweh would bear upon himself the sin, or basically the death penalty, for adulterous Israel and Judah. And he would do it by dying, and then he would prolong his days, in verse 10, by being resurrected, so that he could do what? So that he could remarry Israel in a spiritual sense, as we shall see later on in this teaching. Now in verse 6, 53 verse 6 says, and we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. You know, and Yahweh has laid on him. Yahweh laid it upon him, the Messiah. He laid upon him the iniquities of Israel, the sins of Israel, because they violated the Torah covenant, or better yet, the ketubah, which was the marriage agreement with God that they made at Mount Sinai. They broke his marriage contract. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery. They broke it. So it's interesting to note here what the book of Revelation says about the scroll with the 7 seals written on the back and front. You know, there is no Greek document that would have been written on the back or the front, but only a Hebrew document. And that specific document would have been a marriage contract. A marriage contract, which is called in Hebrew a ketubah, is written on the front as well as at the back. So what we're seeing in the book of Revelation is that Yeshua is opening the scroll, which is the terms and conditions of the bride. In other words, if you are the bride of Messiah Yeshua, then in order to become the bride, you need to weigh up. In other words, you need to kind of not weigh up, but you need to measure up to the terms and conditions that is found in the Torah. Deuteronomy chapter 27 and 28. Those things that are there, it either refers to the things that will happen to you for breaking His covenant, or it refers to the blessings that will come upon you for keeping His covenant. That's why Yeshua, brethren, He judges by His Torah. So the marriage contract that was issued at Mount Sinai is the same Torah that Yahweh is going to use to judge the nations in the end. I hope you're seeing that, alright? So there was no Greek document that would be written on the back or the front, but only a Hebrew marriage contract, a ketubah. And Yeshua is the groom, and therefore He is the only one that is worthy of opening the scroll. When we get into, which, if Yahweh leads me to do it, doing the Jewish wedding model, you will come to understand that it is only the husband, it is only the groom that is able to open that document and read it. And that's what Yeshua has come to do. He has come to read the terms and conditions, and every person that is not able, that has not lived up to His guidelines, they will be judged according to the Torah. That's what it says. Alright? Then in 54, Isaiah chapter 54, verse 1, it says, "For more are the children of the desolate than the children of the married wife, says Yahweh." And in captivity, Israel became spiritually desolate, and they were trampled underfoot of men like dust on the ground. They were destroyed, and they were taken out, if that's the word that I could use there, alright? Then in 54 verse 3, it says, "Your seed shall inherit the Gentiles." This is where Israel became like the dust of the ground, and Yahweh promises to redeem her from captivity, and declares that she will become like the stars of the heaven in numbers and glory. Israel will then become as a net who brings with her the riches of the sea. They will bring in the Gentile people of the nations with whom she is mixed through intermarriage. And we see that with the Samaritan woman. I hope you're starting to see the picture coming together. Then in verse 4, Isaiah 54 verse 4, it says, "For you shall forget the shame of your youth, and shall not remember the reproach of your widowhood anymore." Verse 5, "For who is your maker? Your maker is your husband. He is Yahweh of hosts is His name, and your Redeemer, the set apart one of Israel. The Elohim of the whole earth shall be called." So redeemed Israel, brethren, they shall enter into a righteous and loving relationship with who? With Elohim. Why? Because He is their husband. 54 verse 6. "For Yahweh has called you as a woman forsaken and grieved in spirit, and a wife of youth, when you were refused, says your Elohim. For a small moment I have forsaken you, but with great mercies I shall gather you out of captivity back to Zion. In a little wrath I hid my face from you for a moment, but with everlasting kindness I shall have mercy on you, says Yahweh your Redeemer." Then 54 verse 10, "But my kindness shall not depart from you, neither shall the covenant of my peace be removed, says Yahweh, that has mercy on you." And this verse is a reference to the renewed marriage covenant that Yahweh would make with Israel in the future. Literally, it's a renewal of their wedding vows. And that's what we read in Jeremiah chapter 31 to 33. The scripture that so many people in the church have misinterpreted because they don't understand the covenants of God. And that is what commonly referred to by them as the New Testament, but it is better referred to as the renewed covenant, about which Jeremiah prophesied, and to which Yeshua makes reference to in the book of Matthew chapter 26 verse 28, and in Hebrews chapter 8 verse 8. Let's have a look at what he says, alright? In Matthew 26 verse 28 he says, "For this is my blood, that of the renewed covenant, which is shed for many for the forgiveness of sins." Then in Hebrews chapter 8 verse 8, and I have done this in the teaching on Hebrews, where we went into great detail to explain what is actually going on in Hebrews chapter 7 and 8. So it says, "For finding fault with them, he says, see, the days are coming, says Yahweh, when I shall conclude with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." There we see the two houses of Israel. He's not making a new covenant with anybody else. He's making a new covenant only with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. That's why, brethren, you need to be grafted in to that root which is Messiah Yeshua, so that the tree may grow. There is no covenant with such and such a denomination or such and such denomination. No, he is making a covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. A renewed covenant based on the same principles. Why does he have to renew it? Because he found fault with them. The fault was not the Torah. The fault was what? Where the Torah was placed. No longer would it be on tablets of stone. Now it would be placed through the Messiah Yeshua into our hearts. That's what he's saying. And that's what's important. And the fault wasn't the Torah. The fault was who? The people. The people weren't willing to keep it. That's where the problem lies. All right? Let's go on to Isaiah chapter 54, and I'm reading from verse 11 to 12. It says, "And I will make your windows of a gates, and your gates of carbuncles." This is a reference not to some eerie fairy place. No, it's a reference to the New Jerusalem, of which all Israel, including Judah and Ephraim, will be a part, and which contains only 12 gates, as a reference to what? To the 12 tribes of Israel. There will be no Gentile gate, brethren. There is only 12 gates. Go read it in Revelation 21, verse 12. Then in 54 verse 7 he says, "No weapon formed against Israel shall prevent their redemption or restoration and attainment of righteousness through who? Through Abba Father." Then in 55 verse 1 he says, "Ho, everyone that thirsts, come you to the waters." Brethren, Israel returning out of the wilderness of her captivity, the place where she has been scattered, they are going to be so thirsty for the truth. And that's what is happening today. So many people are coming to the truth and they say, hey, but you know what? It feels like I've been lied to for so many years. And the truth is, you probably were. And indeed, she will drink water from the wells of her salvation, who in Messiah Yeshua. He will be their Redeemer and he will be their bridegroom. You know, it's also important for us to understand that Yeshua is the one that unites. He is the one that brings us all together so that we can see the renewed house of David. That's important for us to understand. Alright? Then in 55 verse 3 it says, "Neither let the sons of the stranger that has joined himself to Yahweh speak, saying, Yahweh has utterly separated me from his people. Neither let the eunuch say, Behold, I am a dry tree." Alright, now by all appearances it would seem that the dispersed of Israel had been cut off with no inheritance and become like a dry tree or life of a eunuch, incapable of producing offspring. No, in reality the opposite was true. While in captivity, Israel had become a vast multitude of people that would be added to the tree of Judah. And we find that in Ezekiel 37:19, or grafted back into the olive tree of Israel in Romans chapter 11. And we're going to look at that as we go on. Alright. So he goes on throughout this entire passage, and if we go to Isaiah chapter 58 and we look at verse 1, it says, "Cry aloud and spare not, lift up your voice like a shofar." In our days, in the days that we are alive in, the sound of the shofar is stirring the hearts of apostate Israelites. In other words, apostate people, those that are in the church, and they are bringing many outcasts of Israelites back to their Hebraic heritage, and we're seeing this happening over and over and over. Now in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, is the scripture that Yeshua referred to. It says, "The Spirit of Yahweh Elohim is upon me, because Yahweh has anointed me to preach good tidings unto the meek. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prison to them that are bound." This is where Yeshua declared that this prophecy pointed to him, and that he was now fulfilling it, what? In their midst. He was fulfilling it in the midst. Then he goes on to say in verse 2, "He has come to proclaim the acceptable year of Yahweh, and this is fulfilled in the first coming of the Messiah, and the day of vengeance of our Elohim, to comfort all that mourn. This is to be fulfilled at the second coming of the Redeemer." That will be fulfilled when he returns. Alright? I want you to please go and read all of Isaiah chapter 61 to see what he is actually saying to us. Alright. Now, brethren, I'm sure that there is no doubt that at this point, many of you listening to this will either be confused or you'll be asking the question, what has this got to do with me? Others of you will be stunned and maybe even feel once again like, hey man, now I'm all the way back at the beginning. But I'd like to answer these questions for you. Firstly, if you're asking the question, what has this got to do with me, then you obviously have not come to understand who you are in Messiah Yeshua yet. You probably do not really know that you have an inheritance. And the problem is that we as believers want things the easy way. We like to serve Yahweh in the manner we want and not in the way that He tells us. Maybe you feel like you've been robbed. Maybe you feel like all those years that you sat in church, you actually learned nothing. You know what, brethren? Yahweh is busy teaching you now. Don't look behind you. Keep your eyes on Him. Do not look to the past, but to the new thing that Yahweh wants to do in you. He saved you and He is busy with you now for this season. Just remain in Him and He will remain with you. So the question is, brethren, what then is the gospel of the good news? Let's take a look at Ephesians chapter 2 verse 12. It says, "And at that time, you and I were without Messiah Yeshua, and we were excluded from the citizenship of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. But now in, or better yet, through Messiah Yeshua, you and I who were once far off, we have now been brought near by what? By the blood and sacrifice of Messiah Yeshua." It is plain to see. It is so plain to see that the good news is the message of love, of a loving God to His people. And that He has, for His people's sake, Israel, He has chosen to send His Son to redeem us into a right relationship with Him. But you know, it is so sad that the church has taught the replacement of Israel and that believers no longer have to keep the Torah. And because of this, they have an incorrect understanding of what the gospel really is. So the question is, from when? From when has this return been taking place? Well, the truth is that right from the beginning, as I said, Yahweh has had one set of rules for both the people of Israel as well as for the stranger. Whenever a stranger would join themselves to Israel, the same Torah was to be obeyed. And as I've said before, this was the central message of Acts chapter 15. And the letter that they wrote to these people was all about the fact that there was one Torah to be kept and that the Torah was still applicable. But they had to let go of their pagan ways and then come into the synagogue and learn the Torah that was being proclaimed on every Sabbath. So James was giving those who were lost the 4 rules or requirements to enter back. It has nothing to do with table fellowship, as many Bible commentators say, and furthermore, it has nothing to do with the Noahidic laws. It has everything to do with Israel playing the harlot with foreign gods. In other words, they were marrying themselves in a spiritual sense with Baal, and that's what is imperative for you to understand. All right? So take note. This is the message of the gospel, that through the Father's love, through His unfailing love, you and I, who were the wayward children that gave ourselves over to false gods, to a false system of worship, just like in the days of Jeroboam, we are now being brought back. And they are being brought near to Yahweh and redeemed from their sins and their waywardness. How? By the shed blood of Messiah Yeshua, who became for us the suffering servant and paid the price of yours and my spiritual adultery. So the point to make here is that they broke what? They broke their marriage agreement with Yahweh. All right? Then we had a look, I think it was in part 1 and part 2, we had a look at the prodigal son. And I said to you that in order for us to understand the parable, we need to take a look at who the prodigal son represents. And I said to you, the prodigal son represents Ephraim. He is the one that went out and he played the harlot. He went out and he squandered his inheritance. He went and did wickedness. And then he came to his senses, much like what is happening today with many, many believers. And he realized that he needs to go back to his father and be restored. And then what did he do? He was brought back into the fold. His father took a fattened calf representing who? Yeshua. And he slaughtered the calf so that the son could come back into covenant and back into what? Into the house. He was no longer in the house. Remember, he was out of the house. And then we looked and we said that the father yearned for his son. And we quoted some scriptures in that, and we said that when the younger son returned, the older son wasn't pleased. And then I said to you that first century Jewish leaders were not happy about the return of those that were once lost among the nations. And they accused Rabbi Shaul Paul of bringing Greeks into the temple. All right? So at the time, the younger brother's return caused the older brother to be upset. And the older brother was not found where? In the house. He was found in the field. And Yeshua says that the field was the world. We read about that in Matthew chapter 13 verse 38. And the older brother was not inside the house. He wasn't under the covering of his father. But he was what? Near to approaching it. It was the younger one that was making merry with the father. And the father goes out to meet the older one, and he pleaded with him, "Such is the father's heart, as I said to you, towards Judah." He wants Judah to be in his house, and our father wants Judah to join the party. Pardon me. So, brethren, just like the prodigal son, we are no longer strangers or aliens. No, we have returned to our Father's household. And that's what's spoken about in Ephesians chapter 2, 11 to 19. Let's take a look at what it says, and I hope that you will get a better understanding. There we have the younger son that took his inheritance and he ran off and he squandered it, as many believers have done today. All right, let's see what it says in Ephesians chapter 2, reading from verse 11. "Therefore remember that you, once Gentiles in what? In the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision." In other words, you are called the uncircumcised by those who are called the circumcised, made in the flesh by hands. That at that time you were without Messiah, excluded from the citizenship of Israel and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you who were once far off have been brought near. How? By the blood of Messiah. For he is our peace, who made both one, and having broken down the partition of the barrier in the temple, that's the barrier in the temple between Jew and Gentile, having abolished in what? In his flesh, the enmity, the Torah of commands in dogma. This is not the Torah of God. He broke down that man-made law that separated a Jew from fellowshipping with a Gentile. He separated that, and he made us no longer, that's why Paul says we are no longer slave nor free. We are neither black nor white. We are neither Jew nor Gentile, but we are all one new man in Messiah Yeshua. That's what it says, all right? Let's go on and see. In verse 15, it says, having abolished in his flesh the enmity. Why? Because Yeshua's flesh is the very sacrifice that renews both the Jew and the Gentile to come together, so that we can be those who are a reflection of Messiah Yeshua. All right, so that's what it says. So as to create in himself one renewed man from the two, this making peace between two factions, peace between the two brothers, peace between the one that was far off and the one that was near. That's why Yeshua in Matthew says that if a brother has a grievance against his brother, go and make peace first, then come to the altar. All right. And to completely restore to favor both of them unto Elohim in one body through the stake, through the cross, having destroyed the enmity by it. And having come, he brought as good news peace to you who were far off, and peace to those near. Because through him we have both access to the Father. How? We have access to the Father through Messiah Yeshua, as well as by the Spirit of Elohim. So then you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the set-apart ones, and members of the household of Elohim. Amen. Now, let's take a look at what Paul says. This is what Paul says in Romans chapter 11. He says that you and I, Ephraim, that we were like wild branches that had been broken off from the olive tree. Because of what? Because of our disobedience to Yahweh. And also because of unbelief. Romans chapter 11, 13 to 24. Then he goes on and he says, but through repentance and faith and faithfulness to Yahweh, they are grafted back into that same olive tree. So what or who exactly is the tree? This is what we need to define. All right, we need to understand that this is a picture of this tree, and basically we need to understand that Yahweh, in his awesome knowledge, he has given us rehearsals or symbols to help us to remember the truth. So being grafted into the tree of Israel, or being grafted and being part of the commonwealth or nation of Israel, is rehearsed, brethren. It is rehearsed every time that we drink of the third cup on the Passover. Spiritually, what I want you to see is that spiritually this symbolizes the cup of redemption. It is the cup which corresponds to the cup of acceptance that a Jewish maiden drinks at her betrothal ceremony to show her Israelite suitor that she accepts his marriage proposal, signifying the beginning of their wedding, the beginning of their betrothal. Also, this corresponds to Yeshua on the night of his Passover with his disciples, when he drank of the fruit of the vine and then passed the cup around and had them drink thereof. It was also the part that he was saying, it was the accepting of them becoming his spiritual bride. it was also his marriage proposal, his new marriage proposal to Israel. And this in turn corresponds to a new believer in Yeshua confessing with he or her mouth that Yeshua is the Master, and believing in their heart that Elohim has raised him from the dead. At this point, one believes unto righteousness and accepts the redemption of Messiah Yeshua and is saved. We find that in Romans chapter 10, 9 to 10. And then we are grafted in to the olive tree. We are grafted into Messiah Yeshua. He is the root of the tree, and Israel is the branches. And Israel needs to be rooted in who? In Messiah Yeshua. We are not grafted into Israel. We are grafted in to Messiah Yeshua. Alright? He, brethren, is the tree of life. He is a picture of that tree of life. Yeshua is the way, the truth, and the life. And Yeshua spoke of this tree when he said, I am the vine, you are the branches. John 15, 1 to 6, and Romans 11, 13 to 24. Now, without a proper understanding of marriage from Yahweh's eyes, it's hard to understand the gospel. And as I said from the very beginning, Yahweh said that he wanted to be married to his people. He wanted them to be his bride. And he gave them his marriage contract, which was the Torah, as I have explained to you. And this is what Paul is speaking about in the book of Ephesians, chapter 5, verse 21. And that's why he says that this is a great mystery. And we seem to overlook these things that Paul says. He goes on and he says the following, and I'm reading from verse 21. Subjecting yourselves to each other in fear of Elohim. Wives, subject yourselves to your own husbands as to the master, because the husband is the head of the wife, as also the Messiah is head of the assembly, and he is Savior of the body. But as the assembly is subject to Messiah, so also let wives be to their own husbands in every respect. Husbands, love your wives, as Messiah also did love the assembly, and gave himself for it, in order to set it apart and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, in order to present it to himself a splendid assembly, not having spot or wrinkle or any of the sort, but that it might be set apart and blameless. In this way, husbands ought to love their own wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself, for no one ever hated his own flesh, but feeds and cherishes it, as also the master does the assembly, because we are members of his body, of his flesh, and of his bones. For this cause a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Then he goes on in verse 32 and he says, this secret of the two becoming one flesh is great, but I speak concerning Messiah and the assembly. He's not actually talking about a husband and a wife. He's actually talking and using a husband and wife in marriage as it relates here to the Messiah and the body becoming one flesh. However, you too, everyone, let each one love his own wife as himself, and let the wife see that she fears her husband. So now the question is, we got to ask ourselves the question, what exactly is going on in this entire passage? All right, let's take a look. Many believers have very little understanding of how physical marriage portrays Yahweh's marriage to his people Israel. Paul discusses this in the first epistle to the Ephesians, where he likens a healthy, Yeshua-centered marital relationship to the relationship between himself and his spiritual bride, or better known in the Greek, the ecclesia, or the called out ones, those who once were in darkness and now in light. They have become the spiritual body of Yeshua, and they are usually referred to in many places in the New Testament. You read it as the church, but there is no word for church. It is actually the Greek word ecclesia, or assembly. Alright? So please note, Paul calls the spiritual union, or the marriage between Yeshua and the congregation, he says that it is a mystery. He says that this is a great mystery. He doesn't even say it's a small mystery. He says it's a great mystery. And the word mystery is the Greek word mysterion, meaning it's a hidden or a secret thing. A religious secret revealed only to the spiritually enlightened or initiated. The secret counsels of Elohim, which are hidden from who? From the ungodly or profane or the wicked. So let's have a look and see. This is why, brethren, that the truth about the restoration of all things has been hidden from so many people. Why? Because they still choose to walk in their wicked ways. They still choose to serve Yeshua, but on their own terms. And Yeshua says, no, this mystery is not revealed to you because you are still walking in what? In an abomination lifestyle. And until you turn to me with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul, you will not understand these things. That's why so many of you listening to this teaching are understanding. Why? Because you have placed Yeshua first. You have done exactly what he said. Seek ye first the kingdom of righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. You see, if you want to grow in maturity with Messiah Yeshua, you need to seek him first. That's what it says in Proverbs. It says that it is the duty of kings to search out a matter. We need to search out the things that God has hidden in his word. It is not for the profane. That's why so many people today do not understand the deeper secrets of the word, because they choose to remain in the first covenant, only at salvation, and never maturing with Abba Father. Let's go on and have a look at what God said. Now, the whole house of Israel, we know, was married to Elohim. Let's have a look and see what it says. All right. It says in Ezekiel 16:6-8, and when I passed by you, I saw you polluted in your blood. And I said to you, when you are in your blood, live. Yes, I said to you, when you were in your blood, live. I have caused you to multiply as the bud of the field, and you have increased and waxen great, and you are come to excellent ornaments. Your breasts were fashioned, and your hair is grown, whereas you was naked and bare. Now when I passed by you and looked upon you, behold, your time was the time of love. And I spread my skirt, which is actually in the Hebrew a talit, over you, and covered your nakedness. Yes, I swore unto you and entered into a covenant, a ketubah, a marriage covenant with you, says Yahweh Elohim, and you became mine. Do you see how he loved Israel? How upset he must have been because they what? Because they did wicked in his eyes, and they ran after other lovers. So Yahweh divorces Israel because of their spiritual adultery. And it says this in Isaiah 50 verse 1. This says Yahweh, where is the bill of your mother's divorcement? And in Hebrew this is called a get, whom I have put away. Or which of my creditors is it to whom I have sold you? Behold, for your iniquities have you sold yourselves, and for your transgressions in your mother is your mother put away. Is your mother put away. So brethren, we need to remember, as I said to you in part 1 to 3, that the whole book of Isaiah is about the actions of Israel. And it's in this passage here that Isaiah is not asking whether or not there is a get, but rather he is asking to be shown the get that he had previously written. How do we know this is the correct interpretation? Yeah, if he had not put her away or divorced her, why would he have prophesied the need for a renewed covenant or renewal of his marriage vows, as he did in Jeremiah chapter 31, 31 to 33? It says the following in Jeremiah 3:8. And I saw when all of the causes whereby backsliding Israel committed adultery, I had put her away, and given her a bill of divorce, yet her treacherous sister Judah feared not, but went and played the harlot also. Then in Hosea 1:9 it says, Then said Elohim, Call his name Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, and I will not be your Elohim. Then in Hosea 2:2 it says, Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, neither am I her husband. Let her therefore put away her whoredoms out of her sight, and her adulteries from between her breasts. Now allow me to show you the connection for a second. Alright, we read this in part 1 to 3, and I'm just going to recap on it. But the whole chapter, Matthew chapter 5, remember we looked at the importance of what is actually going on there. And we said that Messiah Yeshua came, and the first thing that he began to do is do what? He opened the way for Israel to be returned, and he addressed the issue of spiritual adultery. And that's what we found throughout that chapter. So let's go on and have a look at what Yeshua continues to say. In Matthew chapter 5, and I think it was in part 2. If you don't remember it, go and read it again. All right. Yeshua addresses the fact that they were spiritually gone astray, and he was addressing to who? To the house of Judah and the house of Ephraim. And he was saying that I have come to confirm the Torah in your life, and now you need to turn away from your abominations and allow me to do what? to restore you, so that we can have the unification of the kingdom of Israel, so that there can be a restoration of that fallen house. Alright? Ezekiel chapter 36 verse 25 says, "And I shall sprinkle clean water on you, and you shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from your idols I cleanse you. And I shall give you a new heart, and put a new spirit within you. When I shall take the heart of stone out of your flesh, and shall give you a heart of flesh, and put my spirit within you. And I shall cause you to walk in my laws, and guard my right rulings, and you shall do them. And you shall dwell in the land that I gave your fathers, and you shall be my people, and I shall be your Elohim." In part 2, we stress that Yeshua's keynote address confirms that the Torah and the need for it is to be kept. He also then places the Torah no longer in those tablets of stone, but he places it in our hearts, in the Mishkan. And he urges the restoration of the marriage between the whole house of Israel unto Yahweh. So then the question that you might be asking yourself is, so what's the big deal about the whole house going astray? And what's this whole thing got to do with me? Brethren, on this, the entire gospel hinges. We need to see why Yeshua had to die for our sins. The Torah specifically states that when two unmarried people have consensual, intimate relations, they are in essence then considered to be married. Because in Yahweh's eyes, the act of sex consummates the marriage, as it says in Deuteronomy chapter 22, 28 to 29. That's what he says, alright? He says it in Deuteronomy chapter 22, 28 to 29. Alright? Pardon me, I've missed my... Alright, we're here. Sorry, let's go back to here, alright? So, let's go on. And in Exodus chapter 22, verse 16, this is where Yahweh confirms this, that when a man has sex with a woman and they consummate, this is when it consummates a marriage, alright? So, let's take note. On the other hand, if a married woman lies with a man, this is considered adultery and is punishable by death. Deuteronomy chapter 22, 22 to 24 says that. If a married woman lies with a man, this is considered adultery. Alright? And as we have seen, Yahweh gave the house of Israel a bill of divorce. Why? In essence, because she had done adultery unto Yahweh. And this freed her to then remarry. Alright? And the house of Ephraim, or the house of Israel, and the house of Judah were therefore legally married to their foreign lovers, and that is in a spiritual sense. Alright? This is what it says in the book of Isaiah chapter 2 verse 16 to 19. "And it shall be in that day, declares Yahweh, that you shall call me my husband, and no longer call me my Baal. And I shall remove the names of Baals from her mouth, and they shall no more be remembered by their name. And in that day I shall make a covenant for them with the beasts of the field, and with the birds of the heavens, and with the creeping creatures of the ground. When bow and sword and battle I break from the earth, and I shall make them lie down in safety." Hosea 2:19 says, "And I shall take you as a bride unto me forever, and take you as a bride unto me in righteousness, and in right ruling, and kindness and compassion." Then in Isaiah 62 verse 3 it says, "And you shall be a crown of comeliness in the hand of Yahweh, and a royal headdress in the hand of your Elohim. No longer are you called forsaken, and no longer in your land called deserted, but you shall be called Hephzibah, and your land married. For Yahweh shall delight in you, and your land be married. For as a young man marries a maiden, so shall your sons marry you. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, so shall your Elohim rejoice over you." This is also what is said in Jeremiah 31 verse 31. "See, the days of the coming, declares Yahweh, when I shall make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Yehudah, not like the covenant I made with their fathers in the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Mitzrayim, my covenant which they broke, even though I was what? Even though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh. For this is the covenant I shall make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh. I shall put my Torah in their inward parts, and write it on their hearts, and I shall be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. And no longer shall they teach each one his neighbor, and each one his brother, saying, Know Yahweh, for they shall know me, from the least of them to the greatest of them, declares Yahweh. For I shall forgive their crookedness, and remember their sins no more." But now, there is a huge problem. Because, up until this point, you would be able to maybe convince your brother Judah. But the big problem comes in now. Yahweh's word is eternal, and he doesn't lie. He cannot go against his own Torah. And as I said to you, the Torah forbids that a man remarry his divorced and remarried wife. That's what it says in Deuteronomy 24 verse 14. Yahweh divorced the house of Israel. So how, if he divorced them, how can he then remarry them? Because then he would be breaking his own Torah. And then our brother Judah, the Jews, would look at us and say, well, I told you, man, this guy's already broken the Torah way in the beginning, so why should we even listen? Why should I listen to this message of Messiah Yeshua? Because he's not keeping the Torah. Let's have a look what it says in Deuteronomy chapter 24, verse 1. It says, when a man takes a wife, he shall marry her. Then it shall be, if she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found a matter of uncoveredness in her, and he shall write her a certificate of divorce, and put it in her hand, and send her out of his house. And if she left his house, and went and became another man's wife, and the latter husband shall hate her, and write her a certificate of divorce, and put it in her hand, and send her out of his house, or when the latter husband dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that would be an abomination before Yahweh. And do not bring sin on the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. So, if that is the case, then we have a huge problem. So the fact of the matter remains that there is a dilemma. Either the wife or the husband has to die and then resurrect, in essence, becoming a new person. Why? For when a person dies, the law, not the Torah, the law of marriage, that law that is written here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, the law of marriage no longer has claim on them. And brethren, this is the entire message of Yeshua. I hope you're getting the picture. Isaiah 52 verse 13 says, see, my servant shall work wisely. He shall be exalted and lifted up very high. Brethren, this is the mystery of the gospel. This is the message of restoration, that Yeshua would die for his people and redeem them from captivity. Then he would resurrect from the grave so that he could remarry them. This is what Paul is trying to get through to us in the entire book of Romans chapter 7 verse 1 to 14. Romans chapter 7 verse 1 says, or do you not know, brothers, for I speak to them that know, the supplied, how that this, then it goes on, a demonstrative pronoun, this, that, the, etc., namely a reference to a specific Torah pertaining to divorce. He's not referring to the entire Torah, he's referring here specifically to that statement of divorce. For I speak to those knowing the Torah, that the Torah rules over a man as long as he lives. So there he's giving reference, and he's saying this law of marriage, it rules only over a person for as long as he is alive. Then he goes on in verse 2, for the married woman has been bound by the supplied law, right? By that supplied law found in the Torah, to the living husband. But if the husband dies, she is released from the Torah. Not the total Torah. She is released from that supplied piece, from the law, all right, from the marriage laws concerning your husband. So then, while her husband lives, she shall be called an adulteress if she becomes another man's. But if her husband dies, she is free from that part of the Torah, so that she is not an adulteress, having become another man's. So, my brothers, you also were put to death to the Torah through the body of Messiah, for you to become another's, the one who was raised from the dead, that we should bear fruit to Elohim. For when we were in the flesh, the passions of sin through the Torah were working in our members to bear fruit to death. I hope you're seeing this, brethren. I hope that you'll go back and study this entire thing. All right, let's go on. But now we have been released from the Torah. What part of the Torah? We've been released from that part of the Torah, having died to what we were held by, so that we should serve in newness of spirit and not in oldness of letter. What then shall we say? Is the Torah sin? Let it not be. However, I did not know sin except through the Torah. For also the covetousness I knew not of the Torah had not said, you shall not covet. By sin having taken the occasion through the command, did work in me all sorts of covetousness. For apart from Torah, sin is dead. And I was alive apart from the Torah once, but when the command came, the sin revived, and I died. And the command which was the result in life, this I found to result in death. For sin having taken the occasion through the command, deceived me, and though it killed me, through it killed me, so that the Torah truly is set apart, and the command set apart, and righteous and good. Therefore, Has that which is good become death to me? Let it not be. But the sin, that sin might be manifest, was working death in me through what is good, so that sin through the command might become an exceedingly great sinner. For we know that the Torah is spiritual, but I am fleshly, sold under sin. Now the question that needs to be answered is this. The question is, what exactly is Paul speaking about? Firstly, he is referring, is he referring to the entire law? No. Or is he referring to one specific law within the Torah? Yes. It is here that the commentators have taken this to mean the entire Torah has no value, and that is incorrect. Alright? Getting the right understanding. Throughout Israel's history, they have gone wayward. Judah returned to the Torah, but they did not accept Yeshua. Ephraim is still playing the harlot with other gods. And here's the problem. Because Yahweh had already divorced her due to a violation of a marital or covenantal agreement, which I said was called the ketubah, which she made with Yahweh, who was her husband, at Mount Sinai, when she said, I do, to him 3 times. Go read it in Exodus chapter 19:8, Exodus 24:3, and Exodus chapter 7. He could not remarry her without violating his own Torah, as I read to you in Deuteronomy chapter 24 verse 4. Why? Because she had become another man's wife. She had in essence become the bride of our Satan. If that's how we want to play it, if that's how we want to put it out plain and simple, that's what happened. So Yahweh's intentions were clear. He would remarry her, as we find in Hosea chapter 2, 16 to 19, Isaiah 62, and Jeremiah 31 that I read you. So the question is, how does he do this without violating his own Torah? But how could he do this so that she was worthy of but how could he do so, right? The question is, how could he do so? Because she was worthy of death for her adultery under Torah. And B, he could not remarry his divorced or remarried wife. And this is what Paul is trying to make you and I understand in Romans chapter 7, 1 to 6. Paul is trying to explain to us the process. If a woman's husband dies, then she is free to remarry. She is no longer legally bound to her husband, since the Torah laws, those laws pertaining to marriage, they no longer have jurisdiction over a dead man. And this is where the church errs. Some Christian biblical expositors claim this passage teaches that the new covenant believers through Yeshua are now dead to the Torah of Moses. No, that couldn't be further from the truth. But it is Paul that is teaching this. Basically what he's teaching, he's teaching the believers the truth. All right? And the truth that we need to see is that those who teach this, they are overlooking a major detail in the Greek grammar of Romans. What they don't understand is what I read to you right in the beginning of chapter 7. In every place where the phrase the law in the King James Bible occurs in these 6 verses, there is a definitive article which is the. It is found in the Greek. And the word the is Strong's G3588. And according to Thayer's Greek English lexicon, the word corresponds to a definite article, the, which is properly a demonstrative pronoun and can therefore mean this, that, which, who, as well as the. So the question is therefore, let me put it to you plainly. Is Paul referring to the sum total of the Torah, or is he referring to one specific law within the Torah that pertains to marriage? In verse 2 we find the phrase the, or better yet, let's rephrase it and say, or this law of her husband. Here Paul is talking about a specific law pertaining to marriage found in the Torah, and not to all 613 laws contained in the Torah, as the church would like you to believe. And this being the case, to which specific law out of the 613 found in the Torah would Paul be referring? In verse 2 we read, if the husband dies, then the wife is loosed from this law of her husband. It is the law that states that if a woman has sex with another man besides her husband, and she is not legally divorced, she is then considered what? An adulteress. Exodus 20:14. The Torah also forbids a woman from remarrying her first husband, who had divorced her due to her adulterous relationship and subsequent marriage to another man. Deuteronomy 24:14. But how could she remarry her first husband if her second husband was still alive, without violating the Torah which prohibited this? This is impossible in the natural, but with Yahweh all things are possible. What if her first husband were to die in her place and pay the legal penalty under the Torah for adultery, and then resurrect as a new or different man? Is this possible? Evidently Paul thought so. And this is the crux of the entire book of Romans. And this is what Paul is trying to show in his letter. In Romans chapter 10, he shows his desire for all Israel to be saved through faith in the death and resurrection of Yeshua. It is Yeshua that died for our adultery, and from him, he paid the price that we would have, or that we should have. And then what happens? Then he resurrects. He resurrects as what? As the Son of God. And brethren, this is the gospel. This is the message that Yahweh has been proclaiming from the very beginning. That Yeshua came to open the way for his bride to be remarried to him. Paul too is proclaiming the same message that Yeshua was. Romans chapter 10, 14 to 15, which is a greater midrash, as we said, on the book of Deuteronomy chapter 30. And the restoration of his kingdom and the full house of Israel, that is the gospel that both Yeshua preaches, the apostles preached, as well as Paul, and we should be proclaiming. Ephesians 2:11. Therefore remember that you once Gentiles in the flesh, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision, made in the flesh by hands, that at that time you were without Messiah, excluded from the citizenship of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. But now in Messiah Yeshua, you see, he redeems us. You who were once far off, you and I, we have been brought near by the blood of Messiah Yeshua. For he is our peace, who has made both Jew and Gentile, and having broken down the partition of the barrier, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the Torah of commands in dogma that disallowed Jew and Gentile to fellowship together, having revealed and created in himself one renewed man from the two, thus making peace, and to completely restore to favor both of them unto Elohim in one body. Now lastly, brethren, if we take this all back to the letter of Acts chapter 15, and how I started that it is the fallen house of David that needs to be restored, you'll begin to see the picture. James understood this. He knew the prophecies that the lost tribes would return. That is why when Paul and Barnabas went out to preach this message, and the Gentiles who were actually Ephraim were beginning to be saved, it was not a shock, for they knew that it would happen. It wasn't a shock. And what does James say? This has been prophesied from of old, from all the mouths of the prophet. Hence, he institutes the 4 rules. And in order for James to make sure they were sincere in their faith in Messiah Yeshua, he gave them the 4 rules. They pertain to leaving their pagan cult harlotry and returning into the covenantal relationship with Yahweh once again. It has nothing to do with table fellowship with the Jews. It has everything to do with leaving their pagan idolatry. Acts chapter 15 verse 16 says, after this I shall return and rebuild the fallen booth of David which has fallen down. And I shall rebuild its ruins, and I shall set it up. So that what? So that the remnant of mankind shall seek Yahweh, even all the nations on whom my name has been called, says Yahweh, who is doing all this. Who has made this known of old? He's actually asking a question there. Therefore I judge. Who judges? James judges that we should not trouble those from among the Gentiles who are returning to Elohim. Wherefore, my sentence, that we trouble them not, from whom among the Gentiles are turned. And as I said to you, that word was the Greek word. It means to literally or figuratively or morally return. Brethren, you only return to someone if you went astray. And James knew that these were the returning sheep, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And the 4 rules were to ensure that a new believer did not return to pagan ways. They would go every Shabbat and learn Torah, as it says in Acts chapter 15. But that I write unto them, Acts chapter 15 verse 20, but that we write to them to abstain from the defilements of idols, and from whoring, and from what is strangled, and from blood. For from ancient generations, Moshe, in other words, Torah and the writings of Moshe, has in every city those proclaiming him, being read in the congregation every Sabbath. Brethren, I conclude, and I hope that you can see from this teaching the need to adhere to the Torah as a believer in Messiah Yeshua. That there is so much more to the gospel than we have been taught. Yeshua came to place the Torah and his covenant back in our hearts, and we were like sheep that had gone astray. Therefore he said he only came for the lost sheep of Israel. And it's time to see that you need to be grafted in to the tree, and you need to return as the prodigal son to the testimony of Yeshua and the Torah. Torah, brethren, is not done away with. Look at what it says in the book of Revelation 14. Here is the endurance of the saints. Here are those guarding the commands of Elohim and the belief of Yeshua. And it says, they are called the remnant. Brethren, the true remnant of God keeps the commandments of God as well as the testimony of Yeshua, as well as does what Yeshua says. In another translation in the King James, it says, here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Yeshua. And then I've given you there the Greek words, and it says there, commandments means injunction. That is an authoritative prescription, commandment, precept. It doesn't mean the new commandment that all of a sudden the church says Yeshua instituted. There's no such thing. Alright? Isaiah 28:10, for it is command upon command, command upon command, line upon line, here a little, there a little. That word there again is tzav, and it means injunction, commandment. It's the same word. So in Isaiah it talks about the same commandments as it says in the book of Revelation. I hope, brethren, that this has now taken part 1 to part 4 and it has capsulated the entire gospel message for you. I apologize that my nose was all blocked. I'm not feeling the best. I ask that you continue to pray for me, that I can get better and get focused on what Abba Father wants. We need your prayers, and we are open to it, and we ask you, please continue praying for this ministry. Continue praying for us, as there are many new challenges and many things that Father wants us to do. And we just want to remain faithful, and we want to remain focused, and we want to do what He asks. So let's pray. Father, I want to thank you that you are our God, that you are our King, and Father, that you sent your Son, Yeshua, Father, to redeem us, Father, so that He could die and resurrect, so that we, Father, could come back into a marriage covenant with you, so that one day, Father, that we could be seated with you at that table, Father, if we walk and if we mature and if we run this race with endurance. Father, I pray that every ear that is listening to this teaching, that you will bless them, Father, that they will grow, that they will mature, Father, that they will go back to these teachings, that they will study to show themselves approved, that they will be good Bereans, Father, growing, maturing, and living in the way that you want them to. Father, I thank you, I bless you, and I praise you for the ability that you have given me to be able to share this word with them. And I pray that you will multiply it in their lives and in their hearts. In Messiah Yeshua's name we pray.